We all have to deal with them, right? Those really big, important decisions, what to do with our careers, our relationships, our health. It can be totally overwhelming. But what if there was a clearer, simpler way to handle it all? Today, we're going to break down a pretty unique framework from one source that's designed to help you tackle those exact kinds of tough choices. So, just for a second, really think about that. How do you do it? Are you a pros and cons list person? Do you just go with your gut? Or maybe you call up a friend for advice. We all have our own way of getting through it. Well, here's a fascinating thought from the material we're looking at today. What if that whole complicated process could be boiled down? The suggestion here is that making a really clear, confident decision actually starts with just one single, powerful question. Okay, so let's dive right into the first piece of this framework. Everything, and I mean everything, is built around what the author calls the one vital question. This is the absolute starting point for finding any kind of clarity. And there it is, 3 simple words. Is it true? It seems almost too simple, doesn't it? But the whole idea here is that before you do anything else, this is the very first thing you have to ask yourself about whatever you're thinking or whatever you're planning to do. So, according to the source, the second you really truly ask this question, you can't just sit on the fence anymore. Answering it forces you to realize that, okay, a choice has to be made. And from that choice, this framework says, comes the idea that your decision has to be respected. Okay, now this is really important. We have to hit pause for a second, because the word truth can mean a million different things to a million different people. The source we're looking at uses a very, very specific definition, and you've got to understand it to get the rest of this framework. So when this source talks about truth, it's not talking about what we usually call relative truth. Your opinion, my opinion, some cool philosophy. Nope. Instead, it's pointing to something it sees as totally specific, something that doesn't change, an absolute. And here's where the source lays its cards on the table. To define this absolute truth, it turns directly to the Bible, quoting the passage from John where Jesus says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So for this framework, truth isn't just an idea, it's identified as a person. And this very specific definition is the bedrock for the whole process. All right, so if truth is defined in that very specific way, how are you supposed to find it when you're stuck in a tough spot? Well, the next part of this framework actually gives us a practical, step-by-step process for seeking out that answer. The source lays out this clear 4-step path. First, you just ask the question. Simple enough. But then, step 2, you have to actively seek out the answer. That could be through prayer, through research, or even by talking to an expert. Step 3 is a big one. You have to be willing to receive the truth you find, even if it's not what you wanted to hear. And finally, step 4. Once you're convinced, once you feel what the source calls convicted by that truth, you commit to it and follow through. And this brings us to a really, really important distinction in the author's thinking. Finding the truth? That's not the end of the road. It's actually meant to be the solid ground, the foundation that you then use to make your own personal choice. So the source kind of boils this down to a core principle. Part 1, you ask, is it true? To make sure your decision is based on something solid, not just how you're feeling that day. But part 2, and this is so key, the choice is still yours. You get to decide which path you're going to follow. And then finally, the idea is that this well-founded choice must be respected. Now, with a framework that claims to be this powerful, the author gives a pretty serious warning. It's a heads up not to misuse this whole process just to make yourself feel better or to back up what you already wanted to do anyway. And the warning is super clear. Once you've found what you believe is the truth, don't then go opinion shopping for something that feels more comfortable. The source is basically saying that our own thoughts and feelings can be pretty shaky ground compared to this foundational truth. So yeah, the whole point of this is that the search is supposed to be for truth, not for validation. It's about finding out what's right, not just getting someone to agree with what you wish was right. So, if we put it all together, this framework gives you a pretty memorable path for those tough decisions. It all starts when you ask the question. That leads you to seek the answer. Based on what you find, you choose your path. And finally, that choice is meant to be respected. Ask, seek, choose, and respect. So, we've walked through one source's idea, all centered on asking, is it true? Which kind of leaves us with a final thought for ourselves. When you're at a crossroads, what's the one question that really truly guides your choices?